Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dan, and as always, I am joined today by Ryan. How are you doing, Ryan?
Doing good.
All right, so
Um,
we are going to be having a pretty quick breakdown for the Red Division Week 7, and you've selected dark types because Russian literature or something, isn't that right?
right, more or less. I mean, I really like those guys. They really had it under control. Also, we've been left in the dark this week, so we'll get to that. But I thought it was appropriate, and Murkrow's been on the mind lately. All right, it haunts my dreams.
Yeah, speaking,
There's a short story about that by Edgar Allan Poe.
yeah, quoth the Murkrow nevermore. We're
Yeah,
all very familiar. But
yeah.
speaking of being left in the dark, Charles and Noah apparently played this week,
Uh-huh.
and these are the teams they
Charles was the
brought.
one projected to win.
But he did not.
But he did not. This was a game that went to 3. You can see it
We
was very
think
close. We know it went to 3.
it went to 3.
The results are pretty close here if you look at differentials.
Claydol
And
showed up.
we know very little about this other than it was a good set, apparently. So that's our notes. If you want to go back, we can briefly talk about at least some mons that came out that are interesting.
Claydol.
Charles is bringing a pretty similar team to what he brought into you. We do see Noah bring the Claydol and the Kaparaja out. And we did have access to their pastes, so we have like a kind of loose idea of what they were going for. Obviously, on Charles's end, we've got the Terrakion Weavile mode. The Stoice this week was just pretty standard supportive with a Citrus Berry. The Terrakion was also Key Berry, which is pretty sick. Would have been cool to see that. Douse Drive Genesect, and then a Power Herb Meteor Beam Cursula, which I think those all look great into Noah. And then on Noah's end, we have Choice Band T-Tar, which is actually pretty cool. We have AV Kaparaja, which looks pretty good into some of what he brought. We have a Alolan Marowak with Will-O-Wisp, which I think is an interesting tech move to throw on it. Otherwise, pretty standard. We have an extremely stally Credilli. This is Giga Drain Recovered Toxic Amnesia, because Noah has been playing to very stally endgames pretty consistently. We see a really interesting Claydol. It has Ally Switch, Trick Room, Eerie Impulse, and Expanding Force with Mental Herb to get around some Taunt, so that's pretty sick. And then an SD Focus Sash Excadrill. So sets this week were super cool. This was apparently a really good game. We know basically nothing about it though. So I guess we can move on.
Sad Pikachu. Alright, so an actual game that we did see was Jess versus Johnny. So on Jess's side, we see the Mimikyu, Mew, Togetic, Moltres, Urshifu, and Zarude. The first 4 have come almost every week, I think. And then the last 2 are pretty common for her as well. Then on Johnny's side, we see the Malamar, Marshadow, Slowbro, Thundurus, Mr. Mime, and the Sandaconda.
Yeah, and the 4 of those that Johnny brings the most are the 4 that hit the field, which are the Thundurus, Mr. Mime, Sandaconda, Marshadow. We didn't really see the Slowbro or Malamar get to do their thing this week.
But this one, we actually did see the game. So Ryan, why don't you take us through some of what was going on this week?
Yeah, Physical Thundurus was just a great call on Johnny's end. Jess really didn't have anything for like the combination of that Marshadow Thundurus. And I think Max Thundurus was just an excellent call next to that Mr. Mime to soak attacks for it and a helping hand boost so that he could get some key KOs on his Adamant Thundurus. The fact that one thing about Jess's team that I found in Prep 2 is her speed tiers are actually pretty easy to work around if you have something faster. Because like her fastest mon is base 105. So the fact that he can run Adamant Life Orb Thundurus and then click helping hand boosts with it, to me seems like a really, really smart call. And she did not have very significant counterplay for it, especially if you go back to the paste. I mean, almost all of her team was weak to flying and electric coverage. The only things that weren't were Mew. The capture card stuff did happen that game 1. That seemed pretty unfortunate this week. We've actually had a lot of capture card problems this week. I know our Cali folks were also having trouble recording games, so that's just kind of is what it is. Definitely sucks. I know the Mew would have Dynamax there. I'm not 100% sure on how much it mattered. I remember Maxwell did some calcs in chat and talked about it, but I have already forgotten what those said, and I looked like 10 minutes ago, and I'm not scrolling back up. So, sorry about the capture card stuff. It does make that game one a little unfortunate on Jess's end, but I also don't really know what her out was that game one anyway. I felt like Johnny had a pretty clean endgame there overall. The Rocky Helmet Mr. Mime was a really good call. I really liked it. I considered running the same thing specifically for Urshifu with my Raichu. And it ended up doing what it needed to. It got a lot of stuff in range easily so that he didn't have to use the Mime for Helping Hand as much. I don't love Jess's Game 2 lead adjustment. You know for a fact that the next game, Johnny is immediately going to do, like, Thunderous Mr. Mime again, because it, like, just did really good work game one. And then you lead with Togetic or Shifu, which are both weak to the Max Electric, and you don't have any clean switch-ins to that. I don't really get that. I feel like something like a Togetic Mew would have made a lot more sense to me. So you can at least, like, follow me, get the nasty plot off, and then maybe try for taking things out with that. I don't know. It was just kind of odd. It felt like a pretty weird game 2 plan, but the Max Mimi did put in a lot of work. More so than I thought it would. Mimikyu doesn't have the highest attacking stat in the world, but it did some nice work, especially in that game 2, so props for that. What do you got for me, Dan?
Yeah, Malamar finally made team preview. I love Malamar. It's very similar to Lurantis, but it didn't hit the field, so minus 10 points to Ravenclaw, plus 10 for bringing it to preview. So you come out.
I feel like Johnny is like.
He might be a Hufflepuff.
Is Johnny a Ravenclaw, or is he like aggressively Hufflepuff? Anyway.
Yes, one of the two. I was very split between the two of those, but it's not the other two. I'm very glad he brought Offensive Thunderous this week. I feel like that's been something that's been missing, and that really goes into my last comment as well, is that the Thunderous and Marshadow's offensive synergy is so good. Jess's best Thunderous answer is something like a Magnezone, and you don't want to bring a Magnezone in front of Marshadow. Yeah, and I guess the Marshadow also played into why she didn't bring the Hail mode this week, but Hail would have been a really good answer to that Thunderous as well, and I thought Hail looked decent overall. But again, both of her Hail mode are quad weak to fighting, and you can't really bring that as much in front of Marshadow without a great plan. So I think a lot of this is Johnny played well, prepped well, but his team just lined up very well into Jess
really
from
well
an
into
offensive
Jess.
standpoint.
Yeah. And we do see Jess making a call actually this week in transactions to grab a Mudsdale, presumably so she can have answers to things kind of like a Thunderous like this week, which I think was definitely, I know we don't talk about transactions in these, but I do think that was a good call. I feel like after you have a game like this and you're like, okay, this Max Electric type really managed to hit me down. If you see you have some more coming up in future weeks, I think it's really important that you kind of adapt your plan and change gears, and that was really smart. So, good win to Johnny this week. Not a whole lot to say, though.
Yep, and then moving into the last matchup of the week, it was you against Dina. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your thought process and prep here, and then we'll get into the notes.
Yeah, so the thought process this week was this matchup is terrible. That was the most of the thought process.
That is true.
I had very little for a lot of what Dina had. I've been loathing this game since even the earlier drafts of my team pre-transaction. The general idea was I was hoping that I could either set up a Cofagrigus, like an offensive Cofagrigus, mostly because an offensive Cofagrigus just has a lot of surprise factor over something like Spectrier, and it also had the ability to change the terrains with Energy Ball, which is something Spectrier didn't have. So I was thinking that might be one of my max options. And then Lurantis was the backup max with an AV with Leech Life and then like Snarl Arcanine to nerf stuff into the ground so that a Nidoking could theoretically clean up a late game. So that was sort of the plan. I ran really defensive Raichu. Probably shouldn't have retrospectively, but we'll talk about that. That was generally the idea, though. Dina pretty much brought what I expected. I wasn't sure if she'd go for Indeedee or not. I was very worried about a lot of things. She has a lot of modes. It was really tough to make a call on what she would bring in those last, like, 2 slots, which happened to be the Indeedee Thievul.
Yeah, well, now
So
that we
yeah,
know a bit about the prep process, I do think Spectre would have been a decent play this week, but just
yes.
looking at the notes, so Speed Swap for Dina has come out just a few times this season, and it's only been one game in a set, but it wins every game that it's come out. So I like that she hasn't been overly relying on it, that people are to the point where people are playing around it, but it can just like punk someone out of a set that they're not expecting. So I really like the way that she's been playing that over the course of the season. Your anti-Psy spam mode was kind of sus in that it was Lurantis. Maybe just Max Lurantis.
It worked game 2.
It's kind of sus. Yeah, I did think the Sash Nidoking looked really good on paper, and offensively it looked really good, but you just couldn't get a good speed advantage with it, and that's... I don't know, it just didn't perform as well as it should have based on what it looked like on paper. But again, speed control for Dina is her strong suit this season based on the team she had, and I think she made sure she had the speed advantage in basically every single game, which is really tough to do, and she's been playing with it very well, and this week was no exception, which just let the rest of her team go off. And then Lurantis, I pass it over to you.
Yeah, Lurantis gets a second clap. Really, that was the star this week for my team at least. I've been leaning on that thing a little harder, and man, it's a good mon. I really liked how Dina played her Melmetal all 3 games after rewatching the set. She pivoted it really nicely. There was a few times where I wanted to call Heat Wave, but it felt kind of risky too. And she did some really nice pivoting with that, especially game 3, because I felt like I was pretty in game 3 for the most part, except for her Melmetal pivoting really just put me on the back foot. Yeah, the Expanding Force lead was super strong game 1. At that point, game 1 was basically a lost cause. I was hoping for a more defensive Raichu, and it was not, so that was not going to happen. I'm pretty happy with how I adjusted game 2, though. I've already discussed this. Retroactively, I probably should have run Spectrier over Koff, but Koff looked good into the TR stuff, and there were reasons for it. Live and learn, and I definitely needed to run a faster Raichu, so I could have potentially charmed my own Lurantis that game and or Eerie Impulse some stuff much faster than me, so I wasn't stuck bringing basically a useless Koffagrigus. And the offensive Raichu was a really good call. That was something I was super worried about in prep, and I was hoping that she wouldn't see it as much, but she did see it and brought it, and it was very strong.
All right, well, that's our entire breakdown this week. Big winners this week are me and Raz on our bye weeks. Our position improved. Yeah, that's our division.
It was a pretty weird week like that. So, thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you had a nice snack while you watched this for all of 10 to 15 minutes. And bye. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. Bye.